On November 18, 1978, in the dense jungle of Guyana, over 900 people died in a single day. Not from a natural disaster, not from war. They died drinking cyanide-laced flavor aid willingly. Entire family, children, mothers, fathers, not because they were forced, but because they believed. This was Jonestown, the deadliest cult tragedy in modern history. And behind it all was one man, Jim Jones. Not a dictator, not a warlord, just a preacher. A man with nothing but a voice, a message, and a terrifying ability to manipulate. He didn't use violence. He didn't use weapons. He used words. How does that happen? How do people with jobs, education, intelligence, people just like us get to a point where they line up, hand their child a poisoned drink, and do the same themselves? We tell ourselves it couldn't be us, that we'd never fall for something so extreme, that only the uneducated, the weak, the desperate get caught up in things like this. But that's a lie. Because history shows us, again and again, intelligence is not a shield against manipulation. And that brings us to something far more uncomfortable. Something theologian and resistance fighter Dietrich Bonhoeffer realized in the heart of Nazi Germany. He wrote, "Stupidity is a more dangerous enemy of the good than evil." At first, that sounds strange. How can stupidity be worse than evil? Evil is cruel. Evil is intentional. Evil is destructive. But Bonhoeffer saw deep. Evil, he said, has motive. It has a plan. It can be confronted, reasoned with, fought. But stupidity, it's a different monster. It's not deliberate. It's blind. It doesn't think. It doesn't question. It doesn't even know it's dangerous. And that makes it far harder to stop. When a person acts out of evil, they often understand the consequences. They're aware of the damage they're causing. But someone acting out of stupidity, they'll burn down the world and still believe they're doing the right thing. Stupidity doesn't argue. It repeats. It parrots. It shrugs off reason. It wears the mask of virtue. And the scariest part, it spreads like wildfire. Evil can be isolated, but stupidity, it thrives in groups. It hides behind slogans. It finds comfort in crowds. It rejects critical thought because thinking is hard. Doubt is uncomfortable. Certainty, even if it's wrong, is easier. And that's exactly what Jim Jones exploited. He didn't need to convince people to kill themselves overnight. He just needed to weaken their ability to question, little by little. He offered answers that felt good, community that felt safe, a cause that felt righteous. And once the thinking stopped, the control began. Bonhoeffer made another key point. Stupidity is not the same as ignorance. Ignorance is a lack of knowledge. It can be cured. You can teach the ignorant. But stupidity is a refusal to learn. A rejection of truth, even when it's right in front of you. That's what makes it so dangerous. Stupid people aren't necessarily dumb. They're often intelligent, but their minds are closed. Not by lack of ability, but by fear, pride, or blind loyalty. And in that state, they become tools, easily manipulated, easily weaponized, and completely unaware of the damage they cause. Think of the greatest horrors in history.
Genocide, mass suicide, war. They weren't all driven by pure evil. They were driven by ordinary people who thought they were doing the right thing. People who stopped questioning. People who followed order. People who traded thought for comfort.
So ask yourself, when was the last time you challenged your own beliefs? When did you last change your mind? When did you listen? Not to reply, but to understand. Because that's the antidote to stupidity: awareness, thought, courage to question, and the humility to admit we're all capable of being wrong. Jonestown didn't start with poison. It started with silence, with trust that wasn't questioned, with faith that wasn't earned. Never stop thinking. Never stop questioning. Because when thought dies, history repeats. Lack of knowledge, but an active resistance to learning. A stupid person doesn't simply lack information. They refuse to accept new facts. Even when those facts are undeniable, they ignore logic, dismiss reason, and cling to beliefs no matter how much evidence proves them wrong. This is why stupidity is so dangerous. It's not just stubborn, it's self-reinforcing. The more someone falls into it, the harder it becomes to escape. They build echo chambers around themselves, surrounding their worldview with others who share the same illusions. Any information that challenges their beliefs is instantly branded as fake, biased, or part of some conspiracy. They don't seek truth, they seek comfort. This pattern isn't just a personal issue, it has shaped history in devastating ways. Again and again, we've seen disasters unfold, not because leaders were unintelligent, but because they refused to accept reality. Look at the NASA Challenger disaster in 1986. The space shuttle was set to launch on a bitterly cold January morning. Engineers warned loudly and repeatedly that the O-rings sealing the rocket boosters weren't safe in low temperatures. The science was solid. The danger was clear, but upper management pushed forward anyway. Not because they didn't know, but because they didn't want to know. They feared the delay more than they feared the truth. 73 seconds after launch, Challenger exploded in mid-air. 7 astronauts died, not from ignorance, but from stupidity, from arrogance, from an institutional refusal to listen. This isn't a one-off case. History is crowded with leaders who ignored expert warning, dismissed uncomfortable reports, and marched into ruin because they couldn't bear the idea of being wrong. Armies lost in unwinnable wars, economies collapsed under poor decisions, lives ruined, all because people in charge chose denial over humility. And Bonhoeffer didn't stop there. He saw stupidity not just as a personal flaw, but as a collective disease. It spreads, it thrives in groups. The larger the crowd, the more individuals surrender their thinking. They don't question, they don't analyze, they go with the flow, assume the group is right, and silence their doubts. This is how propaganda works. This is how mobs are formed. This is why atrocities have been committed, not by monsters, but by ordinary people who refuse to think for themselves. The moment someone gives up their ability to reason, Bonhoeffer said, they cease to be a person in the moral sense. They become an instrument used by others, steered by forces they don't understand, and blind to the consequences. And perhaps the most terrifying truth, you cannot argue with stupidity, not because the arguments aren't strong, but because stupidity refuses to engage. It doesn't care about truth. It doesn't recognize logic. It cannot be correct because it has no interest in correction. You try to show facts, it says fake news. You point to evidence, it says bias. You raise questions, it shuts down or lashes out. Evil can be confronted, debated, even resisted. But stupidity hides behind good intentions, behind loyalty, behind moral righteousness. It wears the mask of virtue and says, I'm doing what's right, even as it causes irreversible harm. So what do? We stay alert, we think for ourselves, we challenge our assumptions, we ask uncomfortable questions, and most of all we stay humble, because the moment we think we're immune to stupidity, that's exactly when it starts to take hold. Bonhoeffer's warning is clear. The downfall of society isn't driven only by villains in power, but by the masses who refuse to think. The future isn't shaped by the smartest or the strongest. It's shaped by those who choose to keep questioning, followers instead of thinkers. They were swept into a tidal wave of ideology, not through reasoned conviction, but through repetition, pressure, and fear. Once that wave starts, it's almost impossible to stop, because stupidity doesn't shout, it whispers. It comforts. It tells you you're right because everyone else says the same thing. And once you're inside that bubble, truth becomes the enemy. This is what makes stupidity so insidious. It masquerades as common sense. It wears the mask of patriotism, morality, loyalty. And when someone dares to challenge it, they're labeled as traitors, radicals, or threats. Not because they're wrong, but because they disturb the fragile illusion the crowd is clinging to. The most dangerous part of all, stupid people often believe they're doing good. They think they're protecting their families, their country, their values. They don't see themselves as villains. They see themselves as heroes. And that is what gives stupidity its terrifying power. Evil you can recognize. You can prepare for it, guard against, rally others to fight it. But stupidity, it slips under the radar. It sounds reasonable. It looks harmless. And then suddenly it's everywhere, guiding policy, influencing elections, shaping ideology, and by the time you realize it, it's already too late. Bonhoeffer warned us. The real battle isn't always between good and evil. It's between thought and thoughtlessness. The people who blindly follow order, the ones who share falsehoods without checking, the ones who believe what they're told without ever asking why. That's where destruction begins. The antidote to stupidity is not more shouting, not more division. It's courage. The courage to think, even when it's uncomfortable, to question, even when it means standing alone, to admit we might be wrong, to listen before react, to demand evidence before belief. Because the moment we stop thinking critically, the moment we hand over our responsibility to the group, we become part of the problem. Not because we're evil, but because we've chosen the easier path. And stupidity always offers the easier path. History doesn't repeat itself because of monsters. It repeats because good people refuse to think, because they choose safety over truth, obedience over reflection, silence over courage. Bonhoeffer paid with his life for calling this out. He stood up to the most powerful regime of his time, not because he thought he could stop it alone, but because he believed that silence was just another form of stupidity. So the question isn't, are you smart enough? It's, are you brave enough? Brave enough to think for yourself. Brave enough to challenge the crowd. Brave enough to face the truth, no matter how inconvenient. Because once you stop thinking, once you give up your responsibility to question, you become a tool, not a person. And when enough people make that choice, society doesn't collapse from evil. It collapses from silence, ignorance, and the comfortable lie that someone else will do the thinking for us. So next time you hear something that doesn't feel right, don't just scroll past. Don't just nod along. Ask questions. Think harder. Speak up. Because that one act of choosing thought over comfort could be the difference between freedom and disaster. Is how societies collapse, not with explosions, but with silence. Not through monsters lurking in the dark, but through millions of ordinary people who stopped thinking, who nodded along, who said nothing when they should have spoken up. The danger isn't just in those who lead, it's in those who follow without question, in those who hear lies and say nothing, who see injustice and turn away, who feel doubt but choose comfort over truth. That's the soil in which stupidity grows fertile, unchallenged, and deadly. The Milgram and Asch experiments weren't warnings from fiction, they were real. And they revealed something uncomfortable. Most people would rather be accepted than be right. Most would rather blend in than confront a lie. And most would rather obey than think. This is why stupidity is more dangerous than evil. Because stupidity doesn't just allow evil, it empowers it. Evil needs followers. Stupidity provides. When you shut off critical thinking, you stop asking questions. You stop challenging authority. You stop thinking for yourself. You surrender not only your voice, but your identity. And once that happens, it doesn't take a dictator to destroy a nation. It just takes enough people who won't say no. In the digital age, stupidity moves faster than ever. Algorithms feed us what we want to hear. Social media rewards outrage over accuracy. The truth becomes buried under noise, and the loudest opinions drown out the most honest voices. This isn't just miscommunication, it's mass manipulation. And if we're not careful, we don't just scroll past it, we become part of it. Bonhoeffer warned us not to underestimate stupidity. He saw how quickly it can infect a nation, how easily it can disguise itself as patriotism, tradition, or even morality. But he also believed it could be resisted. The antidote to stupidity isn't more information, it's courage. The courage to question, the courage to stand alone, the courage to say, "This isn't right," even when everyone else is silent. It means being the person in the room who says the line isn't the longest because it isn't. It means refusing to press the button no matter who's wearing the lab. It means remembering that truth isn't decided by majority vote, and conscience isn't measured by comfort. Every time someone dares to think, stupidity loses its grip. Every time someone asks why, it weakens. Every time someone challenges the group, something dangerous and rare happens. Freedom. But freedom is never guaranteed. It has to be earned, protected, and most of all, thought through. Because once we stop thinking, we're no longer living freely, we're just reacting. And that's exactly what those in power want. So ask yourself, when was the last time you questioned what you believe? When was the last time you changed your mind? When was the last time you stood up, even if it meant standing alone? Because the moment you stop thinking critically, someone else will do the thinking for you. And that's how it begins. Not with a tyrant, but with silence. Not with hatred, but with obedience. Not with monsters, but with good people who stopped thinking, stopped asking, and followed the crowd straight into darkness. It's easy to spot evil. It's harder to spot the absence of thought. So don't fear disagreement. Don't fear being different. Fear the day when no one questions anything anymore. Fear the day we stop thinking, because that is when stupidity wins. Power can be a dangerous lens. It distorts reality and clouds judgment. This is exactly why Dietrich Bonhoeffer insisted that it's our duty to challenge stupidity wherever it arises. Unlike evil, which can be confronted head-on, stupidity thrives in silence, in unquestioning obedience, in minds that have stopped thinking. If we don't awaken critical thinking in ourselves and others, history will keep repeating the same devastating mistake. Most people assume stupidity is a weakness of the uninformed, the uneducated, or the powerless. But Bonhoeffer saw something far more alarming. Stupidity flourishes where power exists. The higher someone climbs on the ladder of authority, whether a world leader, a CEO, or a high-ranking official, the more prone they become to blind spots in their own reasoning. It's a dangerous feedback. Power isolates people from reality, disconnecting them from the true consequences of their action. When you're at the top, the impact of your decisions doesn't always hit you directly. If a CEO mismanages a company, it's the employees who bear the burden. If a politician enacts a flawed policy, it's the public that pays the price. This isolation destroys self-awareness. Powerful people often fall prey to the yes-men effect. Surrounded by advisors, subordinates and supporters eager to stay in favor, they hear only what they want to hear. Fear or loyalty muffles criticism, and as a result, leaders become trapped in an echo chamber of their own flawed ideas. This illusion of infallibility convinces them that their judgment is flawless. Past successes turn into false proof that they cannot be wrong. Any warning or dissenting opinion is dismissed as irrelevant or disruptive. This detachment from reality is deadly. It prevents leaders from recognizing their mistakes before it's too late. Power breeds arrogance, and arrogance blinds people to their own stupidity. Poor decisions follow, often hidden or justified by those dependent on the leader's favor. The cycle perpetuates itself. Arrogance feeds more poor judgment, which is then defended, creating a shield against accountability. History is littered with such examples. Take the 2008 financial crisis. Experts had warned repeatedly about the housing bubble and the dangers of subprime mortgages. Economists raised red flags, yet executives at the biggest banks ignored the signs. Why? because they believed they were too powerful to fail. They convinced themselves that the market would keep growing, that the rules didn't apply to them. This dangerous mindset led to one of the worst economic disasters in modern history, costing millions their homes and jobs. It was not a failure of knowledge, but a failure to accept reality, a collective blindness fueled by power and reinforced by stupidity. This is why Bonhoeffer's warning matters so deeply today. Stupidity at the top is not just an individual flaw. It's a systemic problem that can bring down entire nations, economies, and society. Leaders who refuse to listen, who shut out truth, who reject accountability, set the stage for disaster. The antidote? We must cultivate awareness not just in ourselves but across society. We must encourage open dialogue, critical thinking, and the courage to speak up, especially when those in power fall into the trap of arrogance and ignorance. It's easy to blame bad decisions on evil or malice, but the greater threat is often quiet stupidity hidden beneath layers of authority and confidence. Recognizing this helps us understand why power must be checked and why everyone must stay vigilant. Because when those at the top stop thinking clearly, it's not just their downfall, it's everyone. The lesson is clear: power without humility breeds ignorance, and ignorance without challenge breeds ruin. To protect our future, we must resist the silence and confront stupidity wherever it arises. The cost of inaction is far too great. Imagine a group of bankers so convinced of their own infallibility that they dismissed every warning about the looming housing bubble. They believed their business models were flawless, that the risks were imaginary. Experts were ignored, critics silenced, and reckless decisions piled up until the global economy finally collapsed. This wasn't just greed at play, it was power-fueled stupidity, a lethal combination that brought the world to its knees. Take the Chernobyl disaster in 1986. Engineers knew pushing the nuclear reactor beyond its limits was dangerous, but Soviet leaders, blinded by arrogance and a need to showcase their technological prowess, ignored those warnings. On the night of the meltdown, supervisors dismissed the danger signs, overrode safety measures, and insisted the experiment continue. The result was catastrophic: an explosion releasing radiation 400 times stronger than the Hiroshima bomb, poisoning cities and leaving scars on history. This wasn't merely a technical failure, it was human judgment, warped by the corrosive effects of power. Psychologists have studied how power distorts the mind, and the findings are unsettling. Power inflates confidence. Leaders overestimate their intelligence and abilities, often wildly so. It dulls empathy, making them disconnected from everyday realities. It breeds recklessness, as those feeling untouchable take dangerous risks without considering consequences. This is why history is littered with powerful people making catastrophically foolish decisions. But can this cycle be broken? Is there a way to prevent power from leading to stupidity? The answer lies in relentless self-reflection and intellectual humility. The greatest leaders in history didn't surround themselves with yes men. They welcomed challenge and criticism. They admitted when they were wrong. They stayed connected to the real experiences of those they led. These qualities, sadly, are rare. More often, power turns people deaf to dissent, sealing them in echo chambers of ignorance and arrogance. This is why Dietrich Bonhoeffer's warning is crucial, now more than ever. A society that blindly trusts its leaders without demanding accountability is destined to repeat the worst mistakes of the past. Stupidity isn't merely an individual flaw. It's a contagious social force, spreading like a virus through groups who stop thinking critically. In today's world, where misinformation races faster than ever, stupidity poses a greater threat than ever before. Before, ignorance traveled slowly by word of mouth, religious dogma, or tightly controlled propaganda. Now social media acts as a supercharger for falsehoods. Studies show lies spread 6 times faster than facts. Why? Because false information is often more shocking, more emotionally charged, and more sensational than the truth. People don't just share information, they share emotion. A lie that triggers anger, fear, or excitement spreads like wildfire, while nuanced facts struggle to gain traction. This creates echo chambers and bubbles, where misinformation thrives unchecked. In these spaces, stupidity not only survives, it flourishes. The consequences are profound. Misinformation shapes elections, fuels social division, and undermines trust in institutions. Stupidity, amplified by power and technology, drives societies toward chaos and conflict. But the antidote remains the same: critical thinking, humility, and the courage to question authority. We must remember that power doesn't grant wisdom, it often blinds. To resist the dangers of stupidity, we need leaders who listen, who reflect, who admit mistakes, and citizens who demand nothing less. Because when power is unchecked, and stupidity unchecked, history doesn't just repeat, it devastates. The lesson is clear: unchecked power plus unchecked stupidity is a formula for disaster. To protect our future, We must challenge both, relentlessly and fearlessly. People don't share information because it's true. They share it because it confirms their beliefs, fuels their emotions, or makes them feel part of a group. Once misinformation spreads, it becomes almost impossible to correct. Admitting you were wrong is hard, so instead, people double down, strengthening ignorance, and fueling the fire of stupidity. Look at how conspiracy theories spread, like wildfire throughout history, no matter how absurd. From flat earth beliefs, to denying overwhelming scientific evidence, stupidity thrives when people choose simple answers over critical thinking. Take the anti-vaccine movement. Despite mountains of evidence proving vaccines are safe and effective, millions believe the opposite. Why? Because fear, social pressure, and misinformation campaigns drown out fact. The more a false belief takes hold, the harder it is to challenge, until entire societies make irrational choices that harm individuals and nations alike. Dictators and authoritarian regimes have always understood this well. They wield stupidity like a weapon to maintain control. Nazi Germany is a grim example. Hitler's regime controlled media, spread lies, and labeled dissenters as enemies. Millions accepted brutal policies, not out of evil, but because they stopped questioning. Philosopher Hannah Arendt called this the banality of evil, ordinary people committing horrors simply by obeying without thought. This isn't just history. Propaganda still shapes political beliefs, fuels division, and makes people follow blindly today. The cure: thinking for yourself. Dietrich Bonhoeffer warned that stupidity spreads when people stop thinking critically. Breaking the cycle means questioning what we hear, challenging popular opinions, and seeking truth, even when it's uncomfortable. If we don't, history will repeat itself endlessly. But is there any escape? When stupidity is so deeply woven into society, boosted by misinformation, reinforced by power, and fed by blind obedience, are we doomed to repeat the same mistakes? Bonhoeffer believed stupidity is more than an intellectual failure. It's immoral. People choose stupidity not because they lack intelligence, but because it's easier. It's easier to follow the crowd than to think independent. Easier to obey than to question. Easier to believe comforting lies than face harsh realities. Yet stupidity is powerful but not inevitable. Breaking free requires conscious effort, a deliberate decision to think different. It demands courage to face inconvenient truths and resist the urge to conform. True freedom comes from embracing critical thought and refusing to accept things at face value. The path forward lies in awareness, understanding that silence, ignorance, and blind obedience are not harmless. They enable destruction. To resist stupidity, we must nurture curiosity, welcome dissent, and cultivate empathy. We must demand accountability from leaders and refuse to let fear dictate our beliefs. Power without accountability is dangerous, because it breeds arrogance and blinds people to their own folly. But the power of individuals thinking critically, speaking honestly, and standing firm against lies is immense. History shows us both the worst and the best of humanity. The difference lies in whether we choose to awaken or remain asleep. So ask yourself, are you willing to challenge your own beliefs, to question authority, to seek truth, even when it unsettles you? Because that choice, thinking for yourself, is the only way to stop the spread of stupidity and prevent history's darkest chapters from repeating. Remember, stupidity isn't a curse we must endure. It's a battle we must fight together, consciously, and without surrender. Real intelligence isn't just about memorizing facts or parroting popular opinions. It's about having the courage to think independently, to question what you're told, and to dig beneath the surface. The first step to escaping the trap of stupidity is training your mind to challenge information critically, instead of accepting it blindly. This doesn't mean doubting everything, but it does mean analyzing evidence actively. When you hear a claim, ask yourself, who benefits if I believe this? Is there real proof, or is this just hearsay? Does this idea hold up when examined closely, or does it fall apart under scrutiny? If a belief demands ignoring inconvenient facts or shutting down questions, it's time to reconsider. Learn to spot emotional manipulation. Propaganda, fake news, and conspiracy theories often use fear, anger, or loyalty to hijack your thinking. When emotions are driving your response, pause and ask, am I being controlled, or am I thinking freely? Stupidity flourishes when people stop thinking for themselves. So the more you train your mind to question, the harder it becomes to fall for blind beliefs. One of the reasons ignorance spreads so easily today is because people live inside echo chambers, closed spaces where only one viewpoint circulates and opposing ideas are dismissed or attacked. If you only consume content that confirms what you already believe, you're not growing, you're reinforcing your own limitations. Step outside that bubble. Read and listen to perspectives that challenge you. Engage with thinkers, not followers. Debate ideas openly, because a wise person welcomes disagreement, while ignorance runs from it. Social media makes this harder than ever. Algorithms are designed to feed you what you want to hear, keeping you trapped in a loop of confirmation bias. Break free by actively seeking diverse sources. Don't let repetition replace reflection. Hearing the same thing repeatedly without questioning it is the breeding ground for stupidity. Dietrich Bonhoeffer observed something chilling. Stupid people often don't see themselves as responsible for their action. They obey orders, follow social norms, and justify their behavior with "I was just doing what I was told." This mindset allowed some of history's worst atrocities to happen, not because of masterminds, but because ordinary people stopped questioning authority. Authority should always be challenged. Holding power doesn't automatically make someone right. Whether a politician, CEO, or spiritual leader, their words deserve to be tested against logic and evidence. Don't confuse compliance with morality. Just because everyone is doing something doesn't mean it's right. History is full of examples where following the crowd led to disaster. Take responsibility for your beliefs and choices. If you hold an opinion, make sure it's because you've thought it through critically, not because someone told you to believe it. True intelligence isn't about knowing more fact. It's about developing the habit of thinking deeply, questioning boldly, and refusing to accept easy answers. Stupidity is not a fixed condition. It's a trap we fall into when we stop caring about truth and start valuing comfort over challenge. But you can escape it. The power lies in your willingness to face discomfort, to question your own assumptions, and to embrace uncertainty. That's how real growth happens. In a world flooded with misinformation, propaganda, and groupthink, critical thinking isn't just a skill, it's a form of resistance. By training yourself to think critically, by challenging authority and seeking diverse perspective, you help break the cycle of stupidity that threatens society. Remember, the future isn't shaped by blind followers, but by those who dare to question, to learn, and to stand for truth, even when it's difficult. The choice is yours. Stay trapped in ignorance, or step into the power of independent thought. The courage to think for yourself is the most powerful tool you have. The next time you hear a popular opinion, a trending news story, or a heated political debate, pause before you agree, before you share, before you react. Ask yourself, am I really thinking for myself, or am I just following the crowd? Stupidity spreads when people surrender their ability to question and reflect. The only way to stop it is by reclaiming that power to ask, to challenge, and to never stop learning. In the end, the choice is yours. Will you think independently, or will you let yourself be controlled? History's darkest tragedies weren't just the work of evil masterminds with twisted agendas. They were caused by ordinary people who refused to think critically. People who followed orders without hesitation, accepted lies without protest, and stayed silent when they should have spoken up. We like to believe that if we had lived through those times, Nazi Germany, the rise of totalitarian regimes, we would have resisted. We would have seen through the lies and stood for truth. But would we? Or would we, like so many before us, go along with the crowd, accept what we are told, and let history repeat itself? Stupidity isn't just a relic of the past. Bonhoeffer's warning wasn't just about history, it's about the present, about us. Look around today. People still believe in baseless conspiracy theory. They blindly follow political leaders without questioning motives or fact. They reject evidence that challenges their personal beliefs. Entire societies are being shaped by propaganda, misinformation, and crushing social pressure to conform. The tools have changed. It's no longer mass rallies or government-controlled newspaper. Now, it's social media algorithm, viral headlines and echo chambers. But the outcome remains the same. People are thinking less and obeying more. Here's the terrifying truth. The more stupidity spreads, the harder it is to fight. The most dangerous people in history weren't evil geniuses. They were too blind or too lazy to think better. Think about the worst crimes in human history. Genocides, wars, oppressive regimes. These horrors were not committed by monsters alone. They were carried out by everyday men and women who believed they were doing the right thing. People who never stopped to ask, am I being manipulated? Am I blindly following orders? Am I contributing to something terrible? This is why Bonhoeffer feared stupidity more than evil. Evil requires intention, planning, and purpose. Stupidity requires nothing. It doesn't scheme or plot. It simply obeys without question, growing stronger until it becomes unstoppable. So how do we escape this trap? If stupidity is society's greatest threat, then the most powerful act of resistance is to think before you believe, to think before you share, to think before you follow. Because the moment you stop thinking for yourself, someone else will gladly take over that role. Here's a challenge for you. Will you be a thinker or a follower? It's not easy. Thinking critically means facing uncomfortable truth. It means questioning authority, even when it's uncomfortable. It means admitting when you're wrong and being open to change. But this is the path to freedom. The freedom to make choices based on reason, not blind obedience. Remember, the cost of not thinking is far greater than the effort it takes to think. When we give up our minds, we give up our power. History doesn't have to repeat itself if enough people choose to break the cycle. So when you hear that next popular opinion, that next viral headline, that next convincing argument, don't just accept challenge, question it, think for yourself, because your mind is your last line of defense against the forces that want to control you. Will you rise to the challenge? Will you be the thinker who refuses to be controlled? The choice is yours. The next time you encounter a popular opinion, a viral news story, or a widely accepted belief, take a moment to pause. Ask yourself, who benefits if I just accept this without question? Am I genuinely thinking this through, or am I simply following the crowd? Am I choosing to be a thinker, or am I becoming just another blind follower? Stupidity doesn't announce itself. It doesn't wave a flag or send a warning. Instead, it seeps into your mind silently, unnoticed, until one day you suddenly realize history has repeated itself again. The same mistakes, the same blind obedience, the same disastrous consequences, and it all happened because people stopped thinking for themselves. Escaping this trap isn't easy. It requires constant vigilance and the courage to challenge everything, even what feels comfortable and familiar. But it's necessary, because if we don't resist, if we don't question, then we become part of the problem. The silent spreaders of ignorance, the unthinking masses that allow history's darkest moments to repeat. If you want to break free from this cycle, subscribe and join us at Cypher. Here we dive deep into the hidden forces that shape human psychology, the biases that twist our thought, the mental traps that limit our understanding, and the unseen influences that shape our beliefs and decisions every single day. In a world designed to encourage blind obedience, to reward conformity, and to punish dissent, learning how to think critically is more important than ever. It's not just a skill, it's a form of resistance. The only way to truly resist the power of stupidity is to never stop questioning, never stop seeking the truth, and never accept anything at face value. So, are you ready to take control of your mind, to stand apart from the crowd, and become a thinker? Because the future depends on people who dare to ask the hard questions, challenge the easy answers, and refuse to be manipulated. The choice is yours. Don't let history repeat itself. Be the thinker who changes the story,